Showery and lighter, could give a few flakes of snow over the hills to the north of the central belt. But it does dry up in its wake, and it's going to be very mild in the southwest, 12 or 13 Celsius, whilst it stays rather cold in the east, although temperatures recovering compared with recent days. The truly mild air that we're seeing in the southwest on Wednesday afternoon becomes widespread later Wednesday and into the start of Thursday, accompanied by spells of rain. That rain heavy at times, and we'll see further wet and windy weather through Friday and the weekend.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner with the latest. There are long queues in South Lanarkshire on the M74. The motorway is down to a single lane on that three-lane stretch. Junction 4 to 5 from the M73 to the Rafe interchange. A lorry's broken down. In Worcestershire, a couple of miles north of Kidderminster, the A449, the Kidderminster Road, remains closed at the scene of an accident. On the M1 in Bedfordshire, the two outside lanes are blocked southbound just after junction 11A, the Dunstable Northern Bypass. A van and two cars are involved in an accident causing long queues. In Essex, the A414 is closed at Harlow off the Eastwick Lodge roundabout. A lorry's overturned, and the M4 is partly blocked heading out of London just after the Brentford turn off junction 2. Coming onto the elevated section, I can see on camera where a car's broken down. Long queues back to the Chiswick roundabout, back onto the A4. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
We're giving you not one, but two chances to win this month, with two prize bundles that include an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash. But that's not all. You'll also get a brand new iPhone 16 and a £500 shopping voucher to spend at your favourite store. So why not be extra lucky this month? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
As the United States and Russian governments meet today and have peace talks in Saudi Arabia, I asked the question, was it premature of Prime Minister Keir Starmer to say we'd send in the troops? Let's talk prisons in the second section. Can we, at the same time, be tough on crime and the causes of crime and not have prisons that are full of people? Plus, we'll have a look at what the Lady Chief Justice had to say just yesterday. And Ruth Ellis's grandson, yes, she was the last woman to be hanged in Britain, he comes in to tell us why he thinks she deserves a pardon, on the verge of a new series about her life. But before all of that, let's get the news with Katie Bowen.
Nigel, thank you and good evening. It's just gone 7 o'clock. These are your top stories from the GB Newsroom. A brief breaking update from the Vatican. Pope Francis has shown the onset of bilateral pneumonia, and his respiratory infection continues to present a complex picture, the Vatican said a short time ago. The 88-year-old pontiff has been suffering from a respiratory infection for more than a week and was admitted to Rome's Gemelli Hospital on Friday. The Vatican said in a statement tonight that laboratory tests, chest X-rays and the clinical conditions of the Holy Father continue to present a complex picture, but that he remains in a good mood. We'll bring you more on that developing story as we get it. France is set to convene a second meeting on Ukraine tomorrow with European nations who weren't present at talks yesterday. NATO ally Canada has also been invited, according to diplomatic sources. That comes as US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have agreed to appoint high-level teams to begin working on a path to end Russia's war in Ukraine as soon as possible. A Kremlin delegate says the US and Russia had a positive, constructive 4-hour meeting in Saudi Arabia about the war. Lavrov added that the deployment of NATO troops in Ukraine is unacceptable for Russia. And speaking this afternoon, President Zelensky of Ukraine has reiterated that negotiations should not take place behind Ukraine's back and has delayed his visit to Saudi Arabia to not give legitimacy to the US-Russia meeting in Riyadh, it is understood. It comes as Sir Keir Starmer said at a meeting with European leaders in Paris yesterday that any Ukraine peace deal would require a US backstop to deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper discussed the situation earlier today.
Well, we need a lasting peace for Ukraine that safeguards the sovereignty of Ukraine. The Prime Minister has met with his European counterparts and will be meeting President Trump shortly as well. Clearly, there can be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine, and there's a huge amount of work to be done. As the Prime Minister has said, this is an early stage in the process.
Elsewhere, Kemi Badenoch and the government have responded to criticism from the Lady Chief Justice today, with the Conservative Party leader saying that politicians must be able to discuss matters of public importance in Parliament. A government spokesman also said that the Prime Minister has made clear that it is for Parliament to make the laws and for the government to decide policy. The responses come after the head of the judiciary for England and Wales said today that she's deeply troubled by an exchange to the latest Prime Minister's questions between Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch about an immigration tribunal decision. During the exchange, the Prime Minister said a decision allowing a Palestinian family the right to remain in the UK after they applied through a scheme designed for Ukrainian refugees was wrong, and that Home Secretary Yvette Cooper had got her team working on closing this loophole. Kemi Badenoch raised the case, describing the decision as completely wrong. The Lady Chief Justice, Baroness Carr, said it's for the government visibly to respect and protect the independence of the judiciary. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now let's go back to Nigel.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
So the big debate, I guess, over the last 24 hours in this country has been, was the Prime Minister right to say that we would send troops as part of a peacekeeping force into Ukraine? To be fair to him, he did say, if necessary, but that part's been completely missed. I wonder, up to 20,000 British troops, could we even manage the manpower? And does it make any sense to do it before we see the final shape of a deal? Well, it was very interesting that Starmer went off yesterday to Paris at a European leaders' meeting and found absolute resistance to the idea of sending troops from the Poles and indeed from the Germans as well. The French, one of the Scandinavian countries, were about the only ones that really wanted to play. I have no objection in principle if there is a good peace deal that looks like a lasting peace deal. You know, if we had, let's say, a demilitarized zone, but equally backing that up, some kind of force. If we were a part of that, in principle, I don't oppose it outright. But I do think the Prime Minister was really acting prematurely in really saying anything on this subject. I think he hoped that he would go to Paris and get other European leaders to support him so that when he goes to DC next week and sees President Trump, he can say, look, I've acted as the bridge between America and Europe. That plan clearly isn't going to work. Today, there have been talks going on between the Russian government and the American government. That's been taking place in Saudi Arabia. Let's have a quick look and let's see what Mike Waltz, US national security boss, had to say about the talks.
President Trump spoke with President Macron just yesterday. Prime Minister Starmer is coming to Washington next week. So I think the facts will continue to push back on this notion that our allies haven't been consulted. They are being consulted literally almost on a daily basis, and will continue to do so.
So we don't know the final shape of this deal by a long chalk. Many are saying, look, the Americans are being far too generous to the Russians, but equally, this still has, I think, quite a long way to go. Your thoughts at home, please. Was Starmer right to commit troops to Ukraine? Tweet #Farage on GB News or email farage@gbnews.com. I'm joined down the line by Major General Tim Cross, retired British Army officer, and the man in charge of the post-invasion planning for the Iraq war. Thank you again for joining us. As somebody who's been used to planning big operations, did the Prime Minister attempt to go just a little bit too early here?
Yeah, I think he did. I should make it clear that I was the UK senior player in the post-war stuff working with the Americans. And of course, that was strategic failure. So it's not my greatest moment in life, I have to tell you, but you could come back to that on a different occasion. I do think he is. I think there's 2 or 3 lines here that you've raised already. We don't know what this peace, in inverted commas, agreement would look like. There are different sorts of deployments that historically we've been involved with. Classic peacekeeping in places like Cyprus, which have been going on for decades. But then there are peace enforcement operations, which I was involved with in the Balkans, where people have signed up to a deal and the multilateral force, the coalition of the willing, under NATO command often, is there to enforce that peace and is therefore prepared, if necessary, to deliver fighting power, to engage in high-intensity war fighting should that be necessary. So until we know what this, and there's a whole spectrum of things in between, really. So until we know what this looks like, it's difficult to know. Secondly, I've said from the beginning of this conversation that I just can't see Putin accepting NATO troops inside Ukraine, of which UK clearly is a major player. So who would make up this force? Who would command it and who would provide its logistic support and, all of the crucial enablers when you put a force in? Understandably, the media tends to focus on, we've got 5,000 infantrymen or whatever, but you need to be able to sustain this organization. You need to be able to move it, strategically get it in there and turn the people over, etc. So there's that aspect of it. And then there's a third dimension, which, as you touched on again, is, how much will Europe, and more importantly and crucially, will Ukraine be involved in agreeing to any final deal?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And I think, to think that the Americans will purely do a one-sided deal, I think is to perhaps underestimate the American negotiating team. But I don't know the answer to that, Tim, any more than you do right now. But that's just a sense that I have of it. If Trump really wants access to rare earth minerals in Ukraine, he's going to have to give something, I suspect, to get that. Quick final thought from you, if I may. Would it even be possible for us to put 20,000 soldiers into Ukraine for a period of a few years? Could we even begin to think about it, given our current levels?
No. I mean, whenever we talk about troop numbers, you immediately have to recognize that after a 6-month operation, you've had a pile of people who've been in that theatre of operations for that tour, which normally for us is a 6-month tour, although it has to be said the 2003 operation, I was there for the best part of 12 months. But nonetheless, generally speaking, if you're there for the long term, you turn people over every 6 months. So you've always got a 3-to-1 ratio. You've got X thousand in that theatre at the time. You've got X thousand who've just come back. You've got X thousand who are preparing to go. And all of the enabling capability that I've touched on. The bottom line is we do not have the numbers to sustain that sort of operation. Again, if it were to revert to a fighting, use of force operation, to sustain that over a long period of time, which is why the strategic defence review that's going on at the moment is so crucial. And what will come out of it, obviously, we will have to wait to see. But even if the Prime Minister was to stand up tomorrow and say, we're going to spend more money, we're going to increase these capabilities, that would not happen in the short term. These are, as Churchill said, it's very easy to destroy an army. It takes a long time to rebuild it. And in my time, I've seen the army reduced almost by half. And we would not have that sort of capability over a long-term commitment, which, I deeply regret, but it is a reality. And Lord Richard Dannett, who I know well and have worked with a lot, is absolutely right in what he's been saying over these last few days.
Tim Cross, thank you very much indeed. Well, he was very, very crisp and concise. Was he not? I'm joined in the studio by Sir Ranald Giles Walden, a former Conservative MP and Minister, and Joe Phillips, journalist and former Press Secretary to Paddy Ashdown. He was very concise and very clear there, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
To put 20,000 troops in the field, you need 60,000 troops.
Yeah, of course you do. And that's only there.
Yeah.
That's without...
Let alone any other commitments.
Exactly. Any other commitments anywhere. We only need something going on in the Balkans. We might have to go back there. We might have to go somewhere else. So I think, several things really, Nigel. As you said, the way Keir Starmer's comments were reported, there was no sense of nuance.
I know that.
He's not talking about sending people tomorrow. We don't know the rules of engagement.
But he was trying to give a lead, wasn't he?
Well, I think he was trying to give a lead on 2 points. One is to say, we stand beside you, Zelensky and Ukraine. It is the one and only thing that Boris Johnson can be commended for, in my view, for his commitment to there very, very quickly and very early on in the invasion. But I think the other message that he was sending wasn't so much to an international audience, it was to his own people, if you like, and the public, that we are going to increase defence spending. In other words, he's going to overrule whatever the Treasury says, overrule what Rachel Reeves says. Now, whether or not...
Well, we'll see.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see.
But, in the end, what we've got is Trump, who regards the world as a monopoly board that he thinks he can buy and exchange with Putin, whether it's the dog or the top hat, and forgetting there's people.
Well, America has enormous power. I mean, Ranald, isn't it at least... Whatever we think of the American tactics thus far, and as I said, we haven't seen their full hand of cards. I'm convinced of that. But whatever we think of it thus far, isn't it a good thing at least talks are happening? Well, or do you take the Boris Johnson position, which, and Joe was right, Boris was very quick to say we must support Ukraine and did give a lead, actually, which other countries followed. Yeah. But the sort of Boris position of the last year has been Ukraine must fight to the death kind of thing.
No, I mean, exactly, that's the point. No one wants any more killing if we can help it.
Yeah.
The Ukrainians don't want that. I don't think anyone else who's been drawn in from the Russian side, and it's not just Russians, wants that. So I think if there is a route to some sort of peace that is acceptable to Ukraine, then that is something that we should all strive for. And you're right, look, we on the outside are only seeing the very, bare bones of what's going on the inside of any negotiation here. But really importantly, I think it's imperative that the British government doesn't overplay its hand. The truth is that ever since John Major and the Cold War dividend was realised, the fall in our defence spending means that we are no longer the player that we were.
Options for change,
exactly.
All those things have happened.
And so, and so this is across, many governments. We have not spent enough on defence. And it is wrong, I think, for a Prime Minister to try and appear the strong man and say we're ready,
it is.
When actually we don't have the capability to do so. I don't think that's fair.
He wanted the other European countries to follow him, didn't he?
I think he wanted to set a tone, and I think this might be, if he does it properly, this could be his defining moment of actually being in the middle, slightly outside of Europe, apparently got a relatively reasonable relationship with Trump at the moment.
But he's not done it properly.
Well,
he's not done it properly. He's not able to back up what he's said, and that's the truth of it, as we've just heard.
No, but you're going down the route of saying, hang on a minute, we know perfectly well it was an expression of commitment, not saying we're going to send troops today. It was if necessary.
Well,
and we're a long way from that. But I do.
But he is a Prime Minister. He did know what he was saying, and I mean, getting back to just looking at the shape of this deal.
I mean, don't forget there could be a different Chancellor in Germany by the time he goes to Washington.
Oh, true. That's true. There could be a new leader of the Tory party, but then who knows? I've been teasing him in the green room.
There is another.
Is it realistic? Is it realistic to think that Ukraine could return to pre-2014 borders?
I think not, and I think we in Europe let that happen. We tutted and turned the other way. And I think that, what Putin does is he plays a very long game. He's not fighting to win an election. He's not fighting for popular votes or anything like that. He can sit and wait.
But there is an argument, though, Ranald, that actually Crimea is now very Russian.
Well, look... complex, I know. And it is for Ukraine to, in my view, that's something that I do think Boris is absolutely right about. It's for Ukraine to actually decide its own terms here and to be a player in any negotiation. Clearly, the Ukrainians have also taken some Russian territory, and in Kursk, right? So they've got the ability, perhaps, to also play their own hand as part of any exchange to reclaim what was previously Ukrainian sovereign territory. So let's see.
Final thought, Joe, would you be happy, under the right circumstances, for British troops, even in limited numbers, to be part of a peacekeeping force?
Yes, with the rules of engagement laid out very, very clearly, as Tim said earlier on.
I'm not usually a supporter of the UN mandate, but I think in this case, something like the UN is probably the right vehicle, and in that case, then yes, British troops, like in Cyprus, would, of course, have an important role to play.
Thank you very much. In a moment, let's talk prisons. Can we be tough on the crime and the causes of crime and bring in a new concept of prisons outside a prison? Confused? We'll try and clear it up in just a moment.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Apparently in 1991, I took out an insurance on my computer, which I have no recollection of at all. But recently, I've had a foreign voice ring me and say, unless I pay the £1,000 immediately, they'll take it out of my bank account.
They wouldn't have access to your bank account,
No, they have no access to my bank account. And what you should do, to begin with, you feel frightened. And you think, my God, £1,000 coming up, what do I do? And then Neil, my partner, said, just ignore it. And that's what you've got to do, but they are persistent.
So threatening as well.
And we changed we changed the number and everything, and still, they managed to get through to you, and we told the bank not to accept any £1,000 checks, something like that. But it is awful. But I say to your viewers and listeners, please, please ignore these phone calls.
Yes.
Even if at the end of the day it's true and they do come and collect £1,000 legally, don't do anything about it. Just ignore it.
Yeah. I think there's an organisation you can phone which is anti-scammer.
Is there?
They can do a lot of this stuff for you. I'm no help to you because I don't know what it is.
Well, I might look into that because it is worrying, to begin with, and then they are so persistent.
Yeah.
That is the thing.
My mum had a similar thing the other day, and this is a good tip to remember. And her bank rang her up and said it was her bank, and they needed to get into her account immediately because someone had hacked her account and they were taking her money out. So it's automatically the panic.
Yeah.
You're losing money. Yeah. And they said, just share the one-time password that's about to come to your phone. And at that point, she went, no, you should never share your one-time password.
No.
Anybody asks you to do that, it's a scam.
No,
phone
exactly.
Back. So just a good one to remember.
Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Some viewer reactions to my question of, was Starmer right to say we would send in the army? Julia said, both of my sons are in the army. One's a sergeant major, the other's in the Royal Artillery. I'm sure that these sons, grandsons of nephews of all people that risk their lives for our country, would risk their lives for our country, not other countries. Would these countries lose their sons to another country? I doubt that very much. Well, You know, until it happens, you can't really tell, I don't think. David says, I wholly believe we should be well away from it. Starmer can't secure our borders. How or why does he want to secure someone else's borders? Well, a little bit of anger there from our viewers. Now, you're going to like this, I promise you. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, today was on a police visit in the Midlands, and this is what she had to say about crime and justice and prisons.
Inherited a prison crisis from the Conservatives, who over 14 years had no plan and failed to build the prison places that we need. Our approach, this government's approach, is to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, and that means making sure that criminals face punishment, but also that we prevent reoffending and prevent crime in the first place.
Did you hear that? Tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. I can't believe it. We heard that from Tony Blair more than once. And all of this on the same day that a report has come out from David Gauke, former Tory Justice Secretary, in which he criticises penal populism. Basically says we're locking people up for far too long. We have to find different ways of doing it, including sending people to prisons outside a prison. That's using technology to keep people effectively under house arrest. But can we be tough and at the same time build prisons outside a prison? Well, I'm very pleased to be joined by Alex Chalk, former Lord Chancellor and Conservative Member of Parliament. The prisons crisis, Alex, it's all the fault of you lot. You've left something terrible behind for Labour. You didn't plan ahead.
No, that's not true. So we had a massive prison building programme. So there are prisons being built at the moment. HMP Millsike, which will open this year. And I no doubt Labour will say it was all down to us, but that was money that we put in as random.
So how many prison places did you build or prepare for?
Yeah, so we built, just in the last couple of years, HMP Fossway, we opened, that's about 1,600 people. HMP Five Wells, we did the year before, that's another 1,600 people. Millsike will be another 1,600. So these are big, closed prisons. None of your open prison stuff. This is big, barbed wire, secure walls and stuff. The issue that we faced is, unlike other jurisdictions who let out thousands of people during COVID, in fact, we didn't. That's point one. And point two is because things got bunged up during COVID, particularly the Crown Court, the number of people in prison awaiting trial has gone from 9,000 to 15,000, and that's put the prisons under great pressure.
Your former colleague David Gauke now working for the government on this issue, but it's an issue around an importance. So perhaps politics doesn't matter so much in this case. Is he right to talk about penal populism, to say that ever more demands for longer sentences, and we've had this for 30 years, and politicians have simply got this wrong?
Right, so he's making a very simple point. And by the way, I yield to no one in terms of wanting to be tough on crime. Just this year, I prosecuted a murder to conviction. I prosecuted grooming gangs, terrorists, and all this stuff. I've done that myself. The point he's making is a really simple one. Before you go on to have the philosophical debate about whether prison works and all that stuff, you've got to make sure there are enough physical places to incarcerate people. So you can't have a situation where some politicians are showboating about how many people should go to prison for how long, but they're writing cheques that the government and that the penal estate cannot cash. So he's making a very simple point: make sure that policy aligns with capacity, and I think that's absolutely spot on.
OK, and the concept of prisons outside prison, does it work?
So the reality is we already have, relatively speaking, plenty of open prison places. So your viewers will know that means, in effect, you've got to be in custody, you've got to turn up, but there are no fences and so on. We've got quite a lot of those places. The real issue that we've got is the number of closed prison places. In other words, thick concrete walls to stop the guys getting out. And that has got to be a centre of effort. How are you going to ensure that you've got enough places for the murderers, the rapists, the terrorists, the arsonists and so on? One point that I would make is just simply this. Remember Jaggers from Great Expectations. Take nothing on looks, take everything on evidence. The evidence should guide all this, and there is evidence to suggest for the lower level offences that somebody who gets what's known as a suspended sentence, in other words, the sword of Damocles hanging over you but you're not going inside immediately, is 25% likely to commit a further offence within 12 months. Somebody who gets banged up for that short sentence of what might be 4 months, when they come out, they are 55% likely to commit offence. So the only question, so this does raise a debate. The question is, follow the evidence. What is going to work? And that's important.
Why can't we get rid of foreign criminals and just deport them? Because that would free up 12,000 places in British prisons.
It's 10,500. It's a great point. Let me just deal with some of it, because I can tell you I sweated blood, metaphorically speaking, to do precisely that. Here's part of the issue. Part of the issue is, of that 10,500, about 6,000 are unconvicted. In other words, they are awaiting trial.
They're on remand.
They're on remand. Now, of course, because they're not guilty of an offence, you can't do anything with them. So that's point one. Point two, then, is of the remainder, some are from countries, and this is a political issue, which I happen to be relatively robust about, some are from countries they're not allowed to send people back to. So Afghanistan, Syria, for example. Now, my view is that we should be testing that and we should potentially be more robust about that issue. I entirely agree.
So you would contemplate, given the role that you've had, would you contemplate leaving ECHR so that we can facilitate that?
Listen, I think we should be testing the ECHR. Is it really correct to say that the prohibition against torture and human and degrading treatment, which I think British people agree with, because, by the way, we wrote most of it, I think we probably agree with that, but is it really correct to say that it is torture or inhuman or degrading treatment to send someone back to parts of Afghanistan? I think a lot of people say, no, it isn't. And I think that's something we should test. I think you test it, and that is the right proportionate step. And one final point I would make is we also legislated, I think it was a brave thing to do, that if a foreign national offender gets to within 18 months of their release date, we will tell them, sling your hook, get out of the country. Now, that was quite, I think, a bold thing to do, but it's the right thing to do to try and get FNOs out of our prisons.
Alex, thank you. Stay there. Now, something else quite remarkable, the Lady Chief Justice, Baroness Carr, in what I can only describe as an outburst, is critical that the leader of the opposition in the House of Commons last week questioned a judgment that said that a family of 6 from Gaza could use the Ukrainian scheme to get refugee status in Britain. She even criticised also the fact that the Prime Minister said it was a loophole, it was the wrong judgment, and we close it. Do you wonder sometimes, Ranald, whether we really do have an enormous battle between the elected bit of the state and appointed judges?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I'm afraid, just total nonsense. If we can't have freedom of speech in Parliament, where our elected representatives are meant to be able to debate the issues of the day, then, this country has just gone entirely mad. So I think that the Lady Chief Justice here is wrong. If this case was in the middle of a trial, that's a different matter. Sure. Or if this is in the middle of a hearing, that's a different matter. But to say, once a decision has been arrived at, that no one can comment on it, that's just wrong.
Does seem crazy, doesn't it, Jo?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I don't know quite why she said it and why she chose to say it. I mean, this was Prime Minister's questions a week ago. Yeah. But it was in a longer interview or a longer piece, which was actually a more important point that she was making, which is about the security of people in the judiciary, which Alex may have a view on, which I think is actually something really relevant.
No, it is. And a final thought on this whole segment, and without dragging you in directly to this row. There is a growing perception that the judiciary are a law unto themselves, that they can use the Human Rights Act or parts of the Human Rights Act in any way that they want, and that frankly, who we vote for makes no difference when it comes to controlling our borders and other really important issues. And that perception or reality, it's growing.
Well, yeah, perception is one issue. I do just want to say one thing in favour, in defence of the judiciary. I should just say we have the second largest legal sector in the world, and we do so in very large part because people come to our shores and they litigate in our country because of the calibre of our judges. They really are exceptionally good. Of course, it's OK to disagree with judges. That's incredibly important.
Oh, you'd have thought so.
I think the only point that was probably being made from somebody who was frustrated, as I've been frustrated as a barrister in court, is that sometimes people talk about cases without necessarily knowing all the facts behind them. Look, I don't know precisely, but I suspect that will have been some of the frustration. But of course, you can disagree with what judges say.
Good. Alex Shaw, absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. In a moment, the National Farmers Union go to meet Labour ministers on the IHT row over farms. They leave pretty much empty-handed and angry.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
A brisk wind continues to blow over the Canaries, but it will be easing as we head through the latter part of this week. Still a few showers across Spain and Portugal. They will also be fading. Much of the east coast of Spain seeing plenty of sunshine along with the Balearics and Sardinia, but a few scattered showers over southern parts of mainland Italy. And looking fairly showery in Greece once more, and with the winds coming down from the north, it is chilly and, if anything, getting colder in Santorini through the rest of this week. Goodbye.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Big changes on the way for the UK's weather during the next 24 hours. It's dry for most at first with clear spells and chilly at first, but then it turns much milder through Wednesday night and into Thursday as Atlantic-driven weather starts to arrive. That weather will turn things more unsettled, but also much less cold compared with recent weather. We've still got the cold air in place though on Tuesday nights and certainly through Wednesday morning with some clear spells, and where we've got some shelter from the wind there'll be a patchy frost to wake up to across central and eastern parts of the UK. A bright start though for many. However, the southwest, South Wales, parts of Northern Ireland we'll see a milder start to the day. Certainly for Cornwall, it's very mild to begin things, but it's also wet as a band of heavy rain moves through. That's pushing into Devon, Somerset, Dorset by 7 a.m, into Wales at this stage as well as Northern Ireland. It's accompanied by a strengthening wind, and that wind will affect much of the UK. It will also tend to thicken up the cloud through Scotland with a few spots of light rain around first thing Wednesday. But the brightest skies will be through the Midlands, the east and southeast of England, where there will be some glimmers of sunlight through the morning and early afternoon before this system moves eastwards. That's going to bring thicker cloud and some light rain and drizzle, but it tends to peter out by the afternoon. Brighter skies for a time towards the southwest, and it's in the southwest where we're going to see that mild air make inroads. 13 Celsius, for example, in Exeter, whilst it stays just 5 or 6 across eastern parts of the country. But by Thursday, we're all in the mild air, and that means a frost-free start to the day, but it's also going to be a very lively start with strong winds and heavy rain, even some thunderstorms around. The wettest weather first thing in the north and west, that clears east. Some brighter skies follow, but the weather's going to be very unsettled, very changeable through Friday and the weekend. Further rain and strong winds at times, but mild with it as well.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The National Farmers Union today went for a meeting with ministers, government ministers, to say, come on, we need some sort of compromise on these inheritance tax plans. This is just a disaster for the small family farming community. Well, I have to say, Tom Bradshaw, their boss, wasn't very happy after that meeting.
Look, I mean, when somebody opens a meeting saying, I'm meeting with you because you asked, rather than having a purpose or anything they want to discuss with you, it's very difficult to believe that that meeting is genuine and that there's going to be any solutions coming out of it. As we went further and further through the meeting, it was very clear that the government believe they are correct. They are not willing to look at any other alternatives. We've actually provided them with a solution which would still raise the revenue, but would reduce the impact on those family businesses that don't have the cash to pay it. And yet they say they're not interested. They say that they've made the right choices and they will push on.
They are not listening. Joe Phillips, you come from farming stock. What do you make of all this?
The government has to listen. They are being so stupid. I mean, we need food security, we need farms. You can understand what they're trying to do, and you can understand, and I agree with, penalising the people who have bought up great tracts of land who are not farmers and who have done it very openly because it's a tax.
To avoid inheritance tax.
Avoid inheritance tax. All they've got to do is either listen to what the NFU and farmers are suggesting as an alternative or raise the threshold. But you once you've lost these farms, you'll never get them back.
No, and they'll become solar farms, and they'll become housing estates, or they'll get bought up by giant American corporations.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, because that's what's going to happen, isn't it?
You know, we need food. We've been talking at the beginning of the programme, Nigel, about the possibility of some conflict. Have we all forgotten the shock when Russia invaded Ukraine, that we all suddenly realised, oh, that's where all the oil comes from.
80% of our cooking
yes,
oil.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, we need to be supporting farms.
Randall, you've been in government. You're used to government making decisions that are very unpopular and lead to protests and all the rest of it. And the thing about this one that I find extraordinary is, whilst it will affect an awful lot of farms, actually, in annual revenue terms, it's not even a big sum of money. They appear to be sticking firm. Do you think they'll change their minds?
I don't know. I hope they will, because it is terribly wrong for them to stick with this proposal. I think the truth is, however, that you reap what you sow. And I hate to say it, but there are some folks who... from the agricultural community were very cosy with Labour ahead of the last election and had been promised the earth by Steve Reed and others that no, there would be no change on inheritance tax. No, we're going to back the farmers. We understand the importance of food security. And the minute they got into government, they changed their mind. And so I think people now need to take stock of that.
I'm going to put to both of you, I think they can change their minds again. And the reason is there are now 100 Labour MPs representing rural or semi-rural constituencies, in many cases for the first time ever. I mean,
absolutely.
ever. And I mean, to think, you know, near where you're from, the Romney Marsh now has a Labour MP.
Absolutely.
Would have been unthinkable. Never happened before. But if you look at the majorities those Labour MPs have got, they are cigarette paper thin. And I think a sustained campaign on this. I mean, I could add to that, Joe, there are 600,000 people with shotgun licences in Britain. They're more than doubling the price of having a shotgun.
Well,
it feels like an attack on the countryside.
Well, and I'm afraid, you know, this is a thing that Tony Blair did when he brought in the ban on fox hunting, which actually I support. But it was done in a way, a bit like the winter fuel allowance, very, very quickly, without any consultation, without any understanding of the countryside. I mean, the cost of living in the countryside, lack of transport, access to healthcare, access to
and you have to have
food.
a car
You've got
and
to have
drive
a car.
long distances.
You know, if you've got kids, you are a chauffeur non-stop.
No.
So if you don't get that, and all of these Labour MPs will be...
I think we... listen, I say we. I say we because I have been supporting the farmers on this very much. I think the government can buckle on this.
Well, they should do. And if they're not listening to pensioners, they're not listening to farmers, they're not listening to business, and they are now getting themselves into a terrible hole.
A hell of a tangle.
And, you know, who are you listening to, actually?
So do we trust our politicians? Do we trust people with what they tell us who they are? Rachel from Accounts has been somewhat exposed, a chancellor who clearly wasn't a Bank of England economist for a decade. But the What the Farage moment today, and I'd suspected this for a long time. Of course, nobody in the 25 men and women in the cabinet has ever set up their own private business. But Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, who went around assuring us that he had been acting as a solicitor, we now learn he never qualified as a solicitor. Now, full story's not out yet, but I mean, I know he's a friend of yours, Ranald, but, you know, with Rachel Reeves, with this, not just breaking promises in the manifesto, but looking like a bunch of people who presented themselves fraudulently to the country. Not pretty.
Yeah, look, Johnny Reynolds is fundamentally he's a good man, but clearly he has erred here. He was a trainee solicitor, not a qualified solicitor. That seems to be...
or just lied.
That seems to be what the facts of the matter are. But I think the bigger issue is, as you say, that Labour is so out of touch with the country, with the wealth creators of this country, because no one has ever been in business. Not only Johnny, but, you know, you look across the whole of the cabinet. They're all union officials.
Sir Ranald and Johnny.
Public sector.
Ranald and Johnny, all part of the Uni Party. It's all the lovely club of Westminster. Can't tell them apart sometimes. Joe, trust me, big serious for a minute.
Yes, you look it.
Got me there. Trust in politics matters.
Yeah,
the Rachel Reeves thing is actually quite shocking now on 2 or 3 different accounts.
Well, yes, it is. And, you know, I would say you just need to go through everything when you're selecting people. You know this, Nigel. You're trying to make reform much more respectable and credible and professional. And that means being absolutely brutal with people who want to stand for office, whether it's a councillor or an MP. Tell me the truth, because the truth will always come out. You know, and if you think it won't, then you are completely naive.
Particularly if you're the business secretary and in the front line of national debate at a time of worry over economics and much else.
It's just silly. It's just
unnecessary.
It's not necessary. That's right.
Yeah.
It's not
damn
necessary.
stupid. Now, 25,000 people have now crossed the English Channel in small boats since Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. And today we learn that the hotels that are rented up and down the country are set to continue being used to house asylum seekers for up to the next 4 years. Sir Matthew Rycroft, the Home Office's permanent secretary, confirmed today. They're not stopping the boats, Joe. They're not smashing the gangs. The hotels will continue to be used in ever greater number. Does this issue have the potential to hurt Labour as much as it hurt the last Conservative government?
I think no, actually, because I think the economy is a bigger concern to people, actually. I think, it does because people like you keep raising it, but I think there are other issues there that, we are no longer part of Europol since we left the EU. We don't have access to the European fingerprint braces. Fingerprint bank and all of those sort of things. I think immigration, of course, is important. But there's a really interesting report today in one of the papers about Spain and how Spain has embraced immigrants, working immigrants, and how that has boosted the population and the economy.
I tell you what, if we embrace people across the English Channel and say, oh, it's OK, you can all come and work, millions more will come.
Yes, but don't forget, a huge rise in immigration, legal immigration, happened under the previous government.
I know.
And they're legal.
Yeah, and it's made us poorer.
And there are students who've overstayed or they're working visas. There does need to be a look at, who is allowed to come in for the jobs and the why. But at the same time, encourage and improve the freedom of movement for young people, which is something that I think would help. As soon
as you do that, you've reopened the doors. Final thought on this, Ranil. I think Joe's right. I think much as it does in the unfairness of this enrages people, the cost of this enrages people, but economics is taking over as an even bigger issue.
I think, actually, sorry to be a broken record, I think part of the issue for Western economies is that we don't have enough children. That's why it's been propped up by immigration under successive waves over the last 50 years. So we need to have a more honest conversation, I think, as a country around the sort of country we want to be. Do we want to be a country that says, let's prop up the economy with people from outside, though we've got to be focused on per capita GDP? The truth of it is, or do we have more children?
Yeah, but it makes us poorer per head. Thank you to both of you for this evening. In a moment, believe it or not, I'm going to talk to Ruth Ellis' grandson. He wants a pardon, and this is on the verge of a big new series about Ruth Ellis' life, which is now out in America and will be available here soon.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
It's also about how children are taught to behave towards people who claim that they have a different gender to their biological sex. And what I'm really concerned about is particularly girls being told that they shouldn't challenge, say, a man in their changing rooms or a boy in their toilets because that is unkind. Joanne, do you think that's actually setting up girls to put themselves in danger for the so-called purpose of being kind?
Again, what you're doing here is you're using these very obtuse type comments to try and paint trans people as some sort of predators and going
I'm
into
trying to
changing
say
rooms.
that there's a reason that we have single-sex spaces, and if girls are socially conditioned not to uphold those single-sex spaces, we are going to have a huge safeguarding challenge.
So it's important that the education we're providing around gender identity, even non-trans people, about understanding your sense of self, I think is really important. I think schools today are doing a far better job than they did when I was younger in the 60s. So I'm not an education profession specialist in this area. I would advocate that education needs to represent the real world, and trans people are in the real world. If it means making girls more aware of their own sense of self, empowering them, giving them, working with them to...
Helen, how is this empowering girls?
Say again?
I just said, moving on to Helen, how is this empowering girls?
This language of empowerment is not the right starting point when you're talking with children. Adults and children have totally different duties and responsibilities and rights and needs. In schools, it's up to the grown-ups to set rules that keep everybody safe. It's not possible to keep everybody safe if you pretend that some boys can be girls and some girls can be boys. That doesn't mean being mean or unkind.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point.
He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The last woman to be hanged in this country was Ruth Ellis, and it is almost exactly 70 years ago. Now, there is an ITV series about to come out. It's available in America already on BritBox, and it's about Ruth Ellis's life. Let's see a short clip of it.
Ruth Ellis, the jury has convicted you of murder. In my view, it was the only verdict possible.
I chose to do what I did. I don't regret it.
She deserves clemency for what she's suffered.
You really think you can take them all on and win? You will be taken hence to a place of execution. May the Lord have mercy on your soul.
Well, it's going to be a very dramatic story. And it leads me to my next guest, Stephen Beard, who is Ruth Ellis's grandson, who joins me in the studio. Thank you for coming in. Yeah, clearly it's going to be a very high piece of drama. But you are now very much on the front foot.
Yeah.
And looking for a pardon. Just think about the circumstances of this. For those that don't know, you know, she had a tough background in many ways. She was abused physically, mentally. But she did shoot a guy 5 times.
She did.
With a gun. It was murder.
Indeed.
As was judged at the time.
Indeed.
So what's your argument for the pardon?
My argument is that since the sentence was delivered, there has been a lot of new evidence that has come to the fore that should have been explored during the course of the case, had the case been handled correctly. Let's be frank, the case only lasted less than 24 hours.
Yeah, fascinating. If you look at the date of the killing and the date of the hanging, it all happened incredibly quickly.
Incredibly quickly.
And what evidence should have been put before that court?
Ultimately, she wasn't the protagonist. She fired the revolver, but she was led to doing so by the ultimate protagonist, which was a chap called Desmond Cusson, who was caught up in this love triangle, who realised that he couldn't have Ruth, and having seen Ruth being beaten black and blue, having lost the child of the man that she ultimately killed, she came home to Desmond Cusson and said, "I can't go on anymore. He's killed me." And he did say to her, "There is a way out, you know." And she said, "How?" He said, he pulled a drawer open, gave her a revolver that was commissioned and given to him when he was in the British Army. She said, "I've never killed anyone, I've never hurt anyone." So he took her to Hampstead Heath, showed her how to shoot the gun, took her to the scene of the crime on the basis that he would look after the children should it all go wrong. Lo and behold, that never happened. She fired the revolver. He then actually acted as a witness for the prosecution. His own cousin was in the legal team within the prosecution.
Good Lord. So a lot more facts. 24-hour case. OK, I fully understand what you're saying. By what mechanism can you get this back before a judge, before a court? I mean, how do you go about this?
I don't know, Nigel. I don't know.
You're just going to campaign to see where it goes?
No, I mean...
Because I did see that Michael Mansfield KC had spoken up and said he was potentially interested.
Yeah, indeed. And if I'm being really open, my mother, who is Ruth's daughter, I remember before her early passing when I was 11 years old, she told me that she'd heard of this new evidence, but she wasn't able to get to the bottom of it, but she didn't have the finances to do so. Fortunately, I managed to do so, and that ultimately led me to reaching out to ITV to say, look, I think my grandmother's real story hasn't been told.
And they picked it up.
And how they picked it up. So I'm coming into this, wide-eyed, and really it's a call to arms. Is there a casey out there that looks at the new evidence and says, Steve, actually, I do think there's a case. And as you said, Nigel, I'm not looking for a pardon against the fact that she did commit the crime.
Yeah.
There is a blemish there, and I don't believe it to be the case that the only option open to the judge was hanging. I think if they'd really explored it, they could have shown some mercy.
And this all comes at a very interesting time, because the debate about the death penalty, it never completely goes away. No. It does come back after outrages, atrocities, and after just totally appalling barbaric murders of those poor little girls in Southport. The death penalty is back as a debate. There's a growing number of young people that really do support the death penalty, and I'm one saying, well, hang on a second, there are quite often terrible... What happened with Ruth Ellis could be a misjudgment, but there are often miscarriages of justice. Indeed. Chap just been let out after 17 years in prison accused of violent rape. He was innocent. I mean, for you... What you're doing, obviously, partly is about your family and the memory of your mother and all, and I understand that fully. Is it also a little bit about the overall debate about the death penalty?
To be frank, no. To be honest with you, I think, as you alluded to, I think there are so many examples in the US where things have been proven that people got it wrong. People have been put to death because of circumstances that came out afterwards. So I'm not looking at that angle. I just really would love someone to turn around and say, actually, we think this was something that wasn't quite right.
That's not our job.
No.
To promote other TV channels here at GBNews.
I'd love it if you did.
But have you watched all of this?
Of course.
Series?
Yeah, of course. So ITV were very kind, and they said, look, we'd love to show it to you. It's pretty brutal. It's pretty shocking. But what I'm really glad is that they did show from a woman's perspective. Historically, there was a film called Dance with a Stranger with Miranda Richardson, but it was all shot from the perception of a man. And ultimately, that she was deemed to be, a lower class woman trying to climb the social ladder and kill this man in a moment of rage. But that wasn't the truth. So hopefully, if people do get the chance to watch it,
was it a three-parter?
It's four parts. So starting on, I think, early March. So four episodes.
Pretty imminent.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Well, I tell you what. It's an extraordinary story. Yeah. And I'm going to look forward to watching it, and thank you.
No, thank you.
By the way, I like ITV. They put me in the jungle.
Of course.
It's the BBC we have the real problems with here. Thank you very, very
Thanks,
much.
Nigel, thank you.
Chris Hope joins me. Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll be tuning in. Fascinating. I think the whole debate on legalising hanging also hasn't gone away yet. No. I mean, where Reform UK seems to me there's a split party on the issue.
Well, I think our view is it's a matter of conscience.
Yeah.
Lee Anderson thinks absolutely we should do this, and I can completely understand in the case of this ghastly man, Radicala, who killed those three little girls, and it's clear and it's evidence and there's no dispute about it. I completely understand it. I just worry, Chris, that there have been 500 major miscarriages of justice in the last 50 years in Britain.
But if half the country want it, I mean, if that's how much it is now...
No.
Would you allow free vote on it if you became...
That is how democracy ought to work. And very often we can have positions where we're in a minority. Yeah. We respect the majority. What have you got coming up?
Briefly, David Gauke, of course, he's done a review with the former Tory minister.
Just be debating him,
That's right. He's coming in talking about his review on sentencing. Mark Francois, the Shadow Defence Minister, about Ukraine. Joshua Rosenberg about Lady Chief Justice, you mentioned, and a Reform donor. He'll be with us too.
A Reform donor?
Yes.
There you are. What are you going to say about me?
You're riding high the poles, your party.
All of that coming up, and with David Gauke, it'll be particularly interesting, I think, because it is a very major debate around prisons.
They're pitch rolling for something big there.
It's going to be really, really interesting. Enough from me. I'm back with you. I won't be with you tomorrow. I'll be live from Washington, D.C. on Thursday. But let's have a look at the weather with Aidan McGibbon.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Big changes on the way for the UK's weather during the next 24 hours. It's dry for most at first with clear spells and chilly at first, but then it turns much milder through Wednesday night and into Thursday as Atlantic-driven weather starts to arrive. That weather will turn things more unsettled, but also much, much less cold compared with recent weather. We've still got the cold air in place, though, on Tuesday nights and certainly through Wednesday morning with some clear spells, and where we've got some shelter from the wind, there'll be a patchy frost to wake up to across central and eastern parts of the UK. A bright start, though, for many. However, the southwest, South Wales, parts of Northern Ireland will see a milder start to the day. Certainly for Cornwall, it's very mild to begin things, but it's also wet as a band of heavy rain moves through. That's pushing into Devon, Somerset, Dorset by 7 a.m, into Wales at this stage as well as Northern Ireland. It's accompanied by a strengthening wind, and that wind will affect much of the UK. It will also tend to thicken up the cloud through Scotland with a few spots of light rain around first thing Wednesday. But the brightest skies will be through the Midlands, the east and southeast of England, where there will be some glimmers of sunlight through the morning and early afternoon before this system moves eastwards. That's going to bring thicker cloud and some light rain and drizzle, but it tends to peter out by the afternoon. Brighter skies for a time towards the southwest, and it's in the southwest where we're going to see that mild air make inroads. 13 Celsius, for example, in Exeter, whilst it stays just 5 or 6 across eastern parts of the country. But by Thursday, we're all in the mild air, and that means a frost-free start to the day, but it's also going to be a very lively start with strong winds and heavy rain, even some thunderstorms around. The wettest weather first thing in the north and west, that clears east. Some brighter skies follow, but the weather's going to be very unsettled, very changeable through Friday and the weekend. Further rain and strong winds at times, but mild with it as well.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Want to be one of 2 lucky Great British giveaway winners? That's right, you could win one of 2 prize bundles, which includes a brand new iPhone 16, £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in your favourite store, and an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. What would you spend that cash on? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and good evening. I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor covering State of the Nation tonight. Coming up, former Justice Secretary David Gauke, who is leading Labour's sentencing review, has made front-page news after claiming that the tough-on-crime policies have left prisons in crisis. He joins me in a moment. Meanwhile, Shadow Defence Minister Mark Francois will be joining me as the question of deploying British troops in Ukraine divides the country. And energy bills are going up, I'm afraid, by as much as £100 a year, despite Labour's promise to cut them. So is Labour's plan for green energy failing. Plus, as the Reform Party widens its lead in the polls, I'll be joined by the South African businessman Rob Herzog, who has thrown his backing behind Nigel Farage as he becomes a party donor to Reform UK. State of the Nation starts right now.